What up, peeps, and welcome to a Finance Guy podcast, a show for all genders and species about bringing some humanity and a bit of fun to the world of finance and tech and leaving you with a little something that can help you on your way. All right, please enjoy. Thanks. All right, welcome to another episode of the Finance Guys podcast. Today we welcome special guest Andrew Wilson. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We're going to do a quick bio to get people up to speed, and then we're going to jump into it.
Okay.
All right, so Andrew got his BA in Poli-Sci from Tufts University out in Boston, Mass, and his MBA in Finance and Operations from UW here in Seattle. He spent 11 years at Intel in Ops Finance and General Management until June 2008 when he started his own manufacturing and R&D company called SpectraWatt. June 2008, perfect time to start a business. He grew that and ran it for 3 years. And then in 2011, he formed On Point Business Strategies, a strategy consulting company which offered fractional CFO services for small businesses. And then in 2016, he made the jump to Amazon Web Services, where he took a role as Senior Finance Manager for Financial Planning and Analysis. And in 2018, he moved internally within AWS Finance over to the existing region global expansion space, which just so happens to be the team that Sid and I sit on. And Andrew now leads our 4-person unit. So, Andrew, welcome to the show.
Soon to be 5.
Soon to be 5,
yeah.
If all goes well.
All is well.
All is well.
It's all confirmed. It's soon to be 5.
Beautiful
Unless
thing.
one of y'all are going to.
We're good. You heard it here first.
Okay.
So Andrew, let's start with so you talked about a story when you were in Boston and you used to ride a unicycle.
Yeah.
And read a newspaper. So just walk us through that story. How did it happen?
How did I come to ride a unicycle and read the newspaper?
And for all the people, Andrew stays in Bainbridge, so he's the second ferry commuter that we have on our podcast.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. Yes. Best commute I've ever had is taking the ferry. And I do it occasionally with a unicycle, too. The question is, how did I come to ride a unicycle? Is that what you're asking?
It looks
I don't know. I always like to try new things and challenge myself, and riding on one wheel seemed like an interesting thing to do. I used to live in downtown Boston, and there's a lot of buskers and like guys juggling on unicycles for money on the street, and it looked like a fun thing to try. So I picked up a used unicycle at a yard sale, and spent a very frustrating about a year trying to figure out how to ride that thing, and ultimately did, and was able to. I can ride 6, 7, 8 miles on one now, and it's pretty much second nature. And all you need is peripheral vision, so you can read while you're doing it, as long as you are good with your peripheral vision and you don't run into anybody.
Have you ever had a bad fall?
No. The nice thing about, for the most part, being on a unicycle, if you fall, it's kind of like stepping off of a stool, so it's not a big problem.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I've had bad falls on bicycles, much worse falls on bicycles.
That, yes.
Yep, and skiing, and other things, rock climbing, bad falls on those, but no, not yet on the unicycle.
Yeah, and it was a good rock climber. We saw that in the gym, actually.
Yeah,
it's pretty dope.
we did our team building at the Rock Gym. This is the most interesting commute so far in the show. Reading a newspaper while we're riding a unicycle.
Yeah,
It's gonna be hard to beat.
That was more for youth, really. That was a good couple of decades ago where I was kind of doing that more routinely.
We need to get a pic of you on a unicycle that we could share in the show notes if that exists.
It does, as do video clips of it, so
Yeah.
I'm sure we could find something.
Oh, beautiful. Let's just kind of start. We like to go back to kind of the origin story. You did your undergrad major in Poli-Sci.
Yeah.
Did you know that was something you wanted to do, or?
No, it was roundabout. So I started my undergrad at the Naval Academy, and as a high school student, I was really only interested in math and science, and I was on an engineering path for sure. But then I went to the Naval Academy. It was a long time ago that I went to the Naval Academy, let's put it that way, pre-Clinton. And Cold War was about at its peak. And so there was a lot of rhetoric that we got sort of brainwashed with, go America, beat Russia, all of that sort of stuff. And I didn't really have any context because my life up to that point had been really, I only care about math and science, and I have to take history and I have to take English because they're core curriculum requirements, but I have no interest in them. And then I came out of that experience which I left after the hazing part of the first summer, and had all these now opinions about how awful Russia was and how great America was, and no context or no actually information around why that was the case. And so while I continued to sort of follow math and science and did a couple of years of engineering, I always had this nagging thing in the back of my head, which is, why is it that we hate Russia so much? And what is it about this thing called communism that's so awful? And why is it that when Reagan and Gorbachev get together, they're speaking English, not Russian? And Gorbachev can speak English. What's going on? So I just sort of had a lot of inherent questions. And so I started taking classes in political science. I found them very interesting. That became a history major relatively soon thereafter, though, right?
Right on.
The Soviet Union fell apart right after I graduated from college.
So then, what was the transition like into finance as a career trajectory?
Yeah, that's interesting. So first, I chose to go get an MBA because I looked around me at the people who were leading the companies that I was working in, that I had worked in, and they all had an advanced degree. So I thought I need to go get an MBA, and technology to me was something that was always interesting. So I really wanted to get an MBA at a school that was well known for feeding technology companies. Mm-hmm. So I only applied to schools that had sort of a tech-centric recruiting path, a more tech-centric recruiting path. So that's how I wound up at UW. Finance was somewhat accidental. I went to a whole bunch of sort of recruiting events. Job was what I was concerned about. And there was a recruiting event put on by Tektronix. Tektronix made color printers and some test and measurement equipment and a couple of other things. And the controller who was presenting to the students there talked about how finance got involved in business strategy at Tektronix and the contributions that finance made to figuring out what strategy was. Strategy is something that's kind of always been of interest to me. I have this bent towards numbers and science and math, and so it felt like a pretty good fit. I can take this math interest that I have, I can take the strategy interest that I have. They seem to coalesce around finance, and then I started sort of pursuing finance paths. I got an internship in Intel between my first and second year of business school, and that translated into an offer. So, mission accomplished as far as the MBA program was concerned.
Yeah. And so you did 11 years at Intel.
Mm-hmm.
You got a good sense of, I'm sure, corporate finance. What was the jump to starting your own company after?
But before that, like, what was your first job after doing?
My first job at Intel?
No, after doing political science.
Political science. I was a paralegal, so I was working I was trying to figure out what do I do with this political science degree that was interesting learning, but this is not a career that's really enticing to me. I don't want to go into foreign service, that the politics is gross as far as I was concerned. I didn't really want to be part of, get involved in the political morass of things. So I had this political science degree. What do people do with this? Well, one of the things they do is law. Legal degrees are really expensive to go off and procure. So before I bother with a specialized degree that's going to require decades to pay off, a lengthy time to pay off any kind of debt that I might run up, I should probably experience that because there's no lawyers. My parents are moved here. I'm a first generation American. My parents come from Australia. So I didn't really have anybody in my, let's call it immediate surround that had legal experience in terms of work. So I became a paralegal to see what I thought of that. I quickly discovered that that was not an area of interest for me. But I did paralegal, translated paralegal into, I took that experience that I had from the first role working with public utility in Boston to go work for Reebok as a paralegal. Then I did a whole bunch of extracurricular things while I was a paralegal and became a necessary employee in kind of the IT space. For the legal department's infrastructure, so they kind of kept me retained for that, and then I transitioned over to sales and marketing. Did sales marketing at Reebok, which was interesting, good learning. The question that you had asked though was regarding first job after.
So you did. It sounds like you did that paralegal poli-sci Reebok path, and that was what led to the MBA.
Right.
And then you did Intel, and then I was asking what happened in 2008 when you decided to go off and start your own.
Okay, sorry. So interesting. Intel had an internal new business incubator, and about 4 years prior, myself and a colleague started just doing some independent research on a new business area, and thought, hey, if you look at Moore's law back at the time was probably going to be 2017, 2018, where if it stayed on the current cadence, Moore's law would probably run out of steam because the smallest trace on a microprocessor would get down to about something like 8 or 9 atoms wide, and it's hard to continue to shrink when you get that physically small. And so there was, in our view, back in whatever that was, 2004, 2005, there's a big existential crisis coming up from the corporation's perspective in a 10 to 12 years. What can we do strategically to address that? Remember, I talked about strategy was interesting to me. So, so we started researching. So what we discovered, I was working on I was in finance, working on a project to expand finance influence across the business, and leading across a global team on that, waiting for a whole bunch of people to dial in. And there was one guy who had dialed in already from Arizona. I was in Florida. I was in Oregon. I don't know where Florida came from. I was in Oregon.
Freudian slip.
Exactly. I don't think so. Anyway, and I had literally just like that day gotten the first electric bill or the day before, I'd gotten the first electric bill that I had received after replacing all of the lights in my house with compact fluorescent bulbs. And my electric bill had dropped by about 40% as a result of that, just by replacing light bulbs. And so I was pretty psyched about that, right? And mentioned it to this guy. And he goes, oh yeah, hey, energy efficiency. I was just reading this thing about solar cells. Did you know solar cells are made out of silicon? I had no idea. I'd never really given solar a second thought, to be frank. But I was like, no, that's interesting. And then everybody dialed in and we had our meeting. And I called this guy, Eric, back, and we had a nice long conversation around, what has he already learned? And he and I together sort of did an extracurricular ongoing project over the course of probably 2 years, where we tried to figure out what is going on in the solar market, what are the drivers of, what are all the different components of market drivers there, what's going on with the technology, where are some inflection points happening, what's going on with the underlying cost of utility power, and when do things get competitive, and that led to the creation of a business plan. Very long story short, business plan that we got funding for me to go off into the business incubator to develop a business plan around how would Intel enter into solar.
Mm-hmm. An internal business
internally funded startup,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
and developed a business plan and pitched the business plan, and some very exciting days and some very disappointing days, and the final outcome was we developed a business plan that was compelling, but Intel didn't want to take on because of the distractions that it would have caused to executive management. So we spun the business out, and so I spent about a year raising money from external parties. Intel was an investor in it, but they didn't take a majority position. And then we spun the business out and created this thing. I was the CEO. But as you say, the timing was really poor. We came into being 3 months before Lehman Brothers went bankrupt.
Well, it wasn't really foreseeable.
No idea.
Yeah.
Nope.
But so did you have to get any IP rights, or everything you had been working on for a year internally, you were able to just kind of take ownership of?
I had an idea when we were putting all this together that we would end up where we ended up. And so as we were negotiating contracts with different entities and so on, we contracted them all in such a way that they could be assigned easily if we created a standalone entity. So all the contracting work that we did just transferred with us. Yes, there was some IP hangups. I might be under NDA where I can't disclose some of that, but we worked all of that out as well. And ultimately, even after the company's now shut down, there's one U.S.-owned solar cell manufacturing company, solar product manufacturing company that would include the component of the product that converts sunlight into electricity, still around, that's not owned by Chinese companies, and that's First Solar. But the IP that we developed, we had some really cool IP. What we were doing basically was developing a novel material that could absorb photons in one wavelength and convert them to a different wavelength and then re-emit them. And the technology turned out to be sort of perfect conversion. That is, if a photon got absorbed, it would get re-emitted. We would lose a little bit of energy in heat because of that shift, because you're actually moving from one energy state to another. But what we were doing is taking light out of the available spectrum that comes from the sun that silicon can't readily absorb and moving it into a portion of the spectrum that silicon would. The material that we developed, turns out, we had a bunch of really smart PhDs working on this, but the material that we developed turns out it has a very good application also to LEDs. And so the company, which we shut down, had this IP portfolio. The technology, the CTO and her team actually acquired the technology out of the bankruptcy and then developed a second company on the back of that. I wasn't part of that. That company got subsequently acquired, and so the technology that we developed is still out there in the marketplace.
Man,
it's kind of
so
cool.
Very cool.
So, and you seem like a renewable guy. Have you never thought of working in renewable space in AWS?
You mean like it going off and developing solar farms and things of that nature?
Yeah, like AWS and Amazon itself has such a big clean energy renewable push.
I might go there at some point. I'm really enjoying what I'm doing now, and while I'm enjoying what I'm doing, I don't see a reason to go off and try to find something else to do.
Yeah, but that's a cool story.
Good team, good group, nice, interesting challenges that we get to face, and my sense is, I'm sure there's lots of interesting challenges on the other side of that equation. And we certainly have this goal to be 100% renewable, powered by whatever point in the future, right? But I don't know. That feels like that work might be more repetitive.
Yeah.
So what was the Amazon origin story when you went from this sort of long stretch of entrepreneurial type of stuff in 2016?
Yeah, there was one piece of my bio that you missed out, which was I had a 2-year stint as an executive director of a not-for-profit, which was targeted at helping renewable energy entrepreneurs find funding and resources to support their work. New England Clean Energy Council, or NECEF. But that's okay. I would say that for me, we relocated the company from Oregon to New York, and my core, I'm a technology guy. I really enjoy technology. I moved from a technology hub of Portland, Oregon, or this Northwest region, to we relocated to Connecticut. The factory was in upstate New York, which was once upon a time a hub of high tech, and it's really kind of an aging. It's where IBM is, right? But it's really kind of an aging infrastructure spot, and the opportunities to go find some interesting job in technology, if I didn't start it myself, were few and far between. And so I tried to find a path effectively to have it's called the quality of life and income that I want, and do work that was meaningfully interesting. But what that required as an independent consultant is to be heavy on the sales path, and sales is not something that I love doing. And so that was sort of an issue that I had to personally sort of come to terms with. And so I came here. I feel like in my career, I've been very fortunate. Lightning for me has struck 3 times. I got to go work for Intel at a very exciting time, while they were kind of growing, and I was working in their motherboard business when they transitioned through the first 1 gigahertz processor. Super exciting. A whole different storyline for that. Got to have this experience of being a CEO and starting a company and developing a business plan, and we spent over $100 million of other people's money. That was super fun. And we returned some of that money, which is more than any other solar cell manufacturing company in the United States can say. And we returned a fraction of that money. And now I get to work here at Amazon during. Look at the growth of this place.
Yeah.
It's not really all that often you get to have that kind of a sort of breadth of experience in a career. So I feel count myself very fortunate. Yeah.
Did you come looking for Amazon specifically? Or yeah.
I must have applied to 50, 60 different roles in here. Interviewed twice. It was the second loop that
really, like you're on the website, just kind of looking at availability.
Yep.
And then how did you eventually get through? Because that's a lot of people, they struggle with. How did you get through and get that first interview? Was it just the persistence and volume of tries?
I'm fortunate that my younger brother was, much younger brother, was working at Amazon. He came to work here after he got his MBA, so he had already been here for 3 or 4 years. So I tried on my own for a while, and then I leveraged him to help. I also have some people from my Intel network who are here. So you reach out to them and you try to find your paths to, hey, can you put in a word with this hiring manager, make sure he reviews a resume instead of just either it never getting to him or passing it up. So yeah.
So, one question on that, like Andrew, when you graduated, you were in Seattle actually.
Mm-hmm.
So Seattle had Amazon also at that point of time.
No.
Microsoft also.
Amazon didn't exist.
Oh,
Well,
didn't
barely. I graduated from my MBA in '97, so Amazon did exist, but it wasn't an entity. I did follow it with great interest while it was a growing, interesting company losing a lot of money. Right, it didn't make profit for a long time. Microsoft was here, but they weren't really recruiting out of UW at the point. But Intel took 10% of my class. So that was easy.
And so,
besides, Intel has one other thing about me is I kind of like something I can touch and really a tangible thing that I can inspect and play with to some degree.
Infra.
And yeah, I mean, infra has that, right? We're physical stuff.
Absolutely.
Intel has that. It's physical stuff. Microsoft is about software, and by the way, AWS is about software too. But for me, my passion doesn't lie in understanding and exploring and in diving deep into the software components. It's about the being able to touch something.
And feel, yeah. I agree.
And then I guess the kind of the unlocked and the hiring process is the networking aspect. That it seems like if you're going to tell somebody who's trying to get a job at Amazon, would it be related to tapping into your network, or what would
I would say yes. I mean, that's good advice no matter what. I mean, there are so many different job sites and boards and everything. And the world is all chasing that stuff. And if you need to put a resume together and you need to stand ready, but really what you need to do is find a person who wants to have a conversation with you, and that conversation will lead to good things in theory. And if you can't have that conversation, you're nothing more than a piece of paper that and a very generic name, and there's nothing kind of more generic than Andrew Wilson.
Yeah. And so what did you find when you got here? Were you surprised? Did anything surprise you about Amazon, or what was the first year like? Yeah.
So I came, one of the jobs that I literally came straight from was one of these fractional CFO roles where I was spending a lot of my time with this one company. And the CEO of that company was a former colleague at Intel. The company had a lot of challenges, and let's just say the overall quality of employee was not maybe what we might like it to be. So I was very excited. I had this Intel experience where I know working with a lot of smart people. Intel was a little bit more of a mature company when I was working there than Amazon is. And it had a lot of systems and processes set up that managed the business very well. So when we dived into stuff, it was very much diving into strategy and not worrying about, can I get access to the data I want? So I was very excited about coming to an organization with these leadership principles and the strength of character and the track record of growth and success, and walking in the door to an organization that is a smoothly running machine. And and don't have to worry about, can I find that piece of data, or can I? This is what I had myself convinced of. And then pretty quickly I discover, this is an organization going through a lot of growth, and we're figuring out what it is, what information is that we want, and then where or how can we gather or maintain that information so that we can do the analyses that we would like to do. So that was a bit of an eye-opening experience. I came in here with very much rose-colored glasses of, all the stuff that I've been struggling with in the startup environment or small business environment for the last couple of years. I don't have to think about it anymore, but that was a bit of a shocker.
Yeah, built for speed here. I think a lot of people spend some time lamenting a lack of process, but it's a natural trade-off, I think.
Yeah, no, I don't think I would have it any other way.
Yeah.
The pace at which we grow, it's just hard to foresee when you're a $3 billion company, what systems and processes you need to have in place when you're a $20 billion company. Because one thing feels like you're pretty big. The other thing is, 4 to 5 times bigger than that, 6 times bigger than that. And yeah, the way things have to scale is of a challenge. But like I said, it's a lot of fun.
So, and you talked about leadership principles, So what is your leadership philosophy, and do you index on some leadership principles at Amazon?
Ownership is a big one. What I would say is I would take a step back from that question and say one thing that I value in a work experience is an organization that takes the time to think about what the organization values, and then actually adheres to those statements of value. And here at Amazon, we use these things called leadership principles, but they're effectively values, right? At Intel and HP and other companies that I've worked at, they call them values, but they're very similar in intent, which is this is how I want to behave. Generally speaking, I value ownership. I value risk taking. I value whatever it is, right? And a lot of times that can just be words on a page. But when you are challenged, what you want to do is use these words on a page as a roadmap for this is how I should be behaving in this sort of environment. And when companies don't behave the way they say they're going to behave, that can start to cause some dissatisfaction within the employee base. Oh yeah, that's just lip service, that stuff. What you really need to do is know who the right people are to talk to, whatever it happens to be, if that's really what the cultural norm is inside of the organization. So it's great when you're working in a company that writes down what they value and then operates along the same way. And that is what we find here. We have these conversations every day around customer impact or ownership, and when we talk about promotion cycles and things of that nature, we refer back to these leadership principles and how do people perform. So generically, I prefer a place to work where that model is the case. I think most people do too, but not everyone apparently, or you would not find organizations that write one thing down and do another. Within the context of leadership principles or values, probably the biggest one is communication. It's not really a leadership principle for us, but making sure that you are clearly communicating and proactively communicating issues before they become massive issues, so that we can focus on solving those issues proactively and in a targeted way. That to me is probably the biggest one. As you know, I could talk for hours on that topic. But if I think about people that I see successful, we have a leadership principle called deep dive. We have a leadership principle called learn and be curious. Those are two that are probably of pretty significant value if people want to be successful around here, because you need to have an interest in understanding how things work, and that's dive deep or learn and be curious. And if you can't figure out a way to find the work that you're doing compelling and interesting, where you want to go dive deep and learn, you might want to think about if the business area you're in is the right business area. This is a really interesting company, though, Amazon, because if there's a business area you're interested in, you probably have the opportunity to go find a role doing that thing. If it's fashion, if it's airplanes, if it's renewable technology, if it's designing computers or designing tablets or producing movies, it's Sky's the limit. Music, whatever.
I was surprised. I met a guy who was actually a food chemist.
That works here.
Yeah, he works here, and
we've got the.
We have our own brands, this is so cool, so you can have everyone actually.
We've got the competitor to, we've got that boxed food thing that's pre-prepared that you can go buy at the Go store.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of.
I have my friends and family always ask me about something that Amazon has put out to the market. And I said, you probably know more than I do because I don't have any special way to keep track of all these different things.
So Andrew, staying on leadership principles, any leadership principle you think is, is not in those 14 leadership you want to add to that?
Are there any would I add a leadership principle that we don't have written down?
Yeah.
Intel had a value that they took off and then they put back on because of the employee backlash for taking it off, which was I think it was learn. It's been a while. Have fun was in the middle of it, though. Shouldn't we be enjoying our jobs? Work-life balance, maybe. We don't actually have that as a leadership principle, but I think having a positive life outlook and feeling like work is part of life, not substituting for or all consuming, is probably pretty important.
Work-life harmony.
Work-life harmony. We have that. We do address that through other mechanisms like the team norms, things like that. But it would be good if we had most senior leadership acknowledging that work-life balance was an important part of a healthy work environment.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because to me there's so many demonstrations like I've been looking at paternity leave recently. They have the tuition reimbursement. They acquired Zappos for the sheer aspect of their culture. And there's all these macro moves that kind of signal that they've got their eye on this.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't seem like a big stretch to codify it,
This is true. This is true. But I would...
what I'm saying is that it would make sense to codify it to me.
I agree. I think it would make sense to codify it. What my pessimistic side of myself is wondering, did we introduce things like parental leave because we thought introducing parental leave was a wise thing to do and something that we want to share or enable our employee base to have. Which I'm sure that's how it was messaged. Or did we get there because there was competitive pressure to do so? And that seemed to be what's happening in the high tech industry that we find ourselves in. And so to maintain the recruitment rates that we need to make sure that we're offering competitive packages. I don't know. I'm obviously not part of that decision. I would like to think that it's the former, not the latter. But who knows where these concepts get introduced. I agree with you, though. We have enough of these things that seem to indicate we value work-life balance, that we ought to make it crystal clear, especially to people who are coming in the company from outside. I would like to figure out a way that we could retain people here better. I think that would be a worthwhile effort for the company to focus on.
Yeah. What would you say to, we usually ask what advice could you give to new analysts, but I'm curious just anyone in Amazon, you talk about retainage and that's sort of a management leadership kind of thing. What advice would you kind of give to people starting out or maybe people managing teams here that you think could help retainage or,
So a couple of things. Firstly is one of the hardest as a manager of people, one of the most difficult people to manage are people that have never managed people before, meaning individual contributors. Usually individual contributors haven't yet had the experience of management. and because they have a high expectation. And why is that harder than managing managers? Well, managers are managing people, and so they are dealing with the frustrations that come at a manager, and so they now can empathize with their management, right, when they're being managed. So the second level managers and above are managing people who have a different sort of experience base in terms of what it means to manage people. And yet the first people that manage, your first managerial role is managing people that have never been managed before. So the hardest place to manage is the first point of experience. And so as a result of that, I would encourage new people who come in to recognize that it's likely they're being managed by somebody who has kind of new experience with that, and then as a result of that, don't be concerned about over communicating how you're feeling about things to that manager, so that they can help you manage through challenges as you're having them. I teach a class called Situational Leadership, and we spend a lot of time in that class saying, hey, in some of the things that I work on, I'm going to be a domain expert, and I'm going to know everything there is to do. And I don't need any managerial help for that. Thank you very much. Although I would like some recognition, right? An occasional attaboy, you did a great job. We really value what you're doing. That goes a long way when I'm, especially when I'm an accomplished player, right? Otherwise, I'll feel ignored and maybe feel compelled to go find something more interesting where I'll be appreciated, right? The other side of the story, though, is I'm also going to have things come onto my plate that I've never done before and are a big stretch for me, and I might not know where to go. This is a culture that kind of values this concept of ownership, and so we often will say, here's your new task, go figure out how to manage this new task. Whereas, if I was given one of those, I would hope that I could go to my manager and say, this is a new task, I've never done it before. I could really stand some direction or guidance on who do I need to go talk to, what do I need to be concerned about, what are the major pitfalls, walk me through that, kind of hold my hand through that for my first experience while I'm learning that role or that task. And I don't think new people will often have the the comfort level with exposing the fact that they are concerned that they don't know how to do a job. And I would encourage people to set that concern aside and have straightforward conversations, because your manager should know when you walk in the door that you don't know how to do a job, and it should be okay to ask questions about how to do that.
Yeah.
So maybe at some time micromanagement is also good, when somebody is starting.
Yeah, micromanagement is only micromanagement when I don't want the help.
If you want the help, it's adequate
management.
Yeah.
It's not micromanagement. It is appropriate management. But we wouldn't call it micromanagement. Micromanagement is when you're in my business, when you're perceived as being in my business, and I don't need you offering that advice or guidance.
Yeah.
But it is one of the things we query. And at the beginning of this class, we talked about, think about the worst manager you've ever had, and what behaviors do they exhibit. And you get both micromanagement and didn't share any information with me as two things that people call out. And because they're thinking about that manager, but they're not necessarily put in the context of, oh, on this task he was micromanaging me, but on this other task he was ignoring me, or she.
Yeah.
I think let's jump to some of the personality stuff we like to ask on this show.
Okay.
There's a question I've been asking. I'd been asking people, what 3 people would you most want to have dinner with? And everyone was hacking my question, and they kept saying their kids, which I think I love that. But if I were to ask you a different way,
I have dinner with my kids all the time.
So I was thinking, let me ask you, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, they go in the phone booth, and collect historical figures.
Okay.
If you were going to go in the phone booth and you could have lunch with anybody from history in that context, who would the 3 people be that you would want to assemble?
Let's see. Albert Einstein might be on that list.
That's cool.
Albert Einstein has. Anybody know? Do you guys know what Albert Einstein has a Nobel Prize for?
I mean, I would assume physics.
Physics, but what was the topic?
It was the theory of relativity.
Theory of relativity is not what he got his Nobel Prize for. He got his Nobel Prize for the photovoltaic electric effect. Yes.
What is? I don't know what that is.
That's solar energy.
Got it. Okay, that's that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that H is equal to E nu?
No, I don't.
Is that the equation?
H is equal to E nu.
Yeah.
E equals MC squared is the one everyone knows. That's
We might be about to be getting kicked out.
okay. We'll do the lightning
Well,
round
so
here.
by the way, but the number one. So
Yeah.
I would have to think about number two.
Yeah.
Or number three, whatever. Number one is Richard P. Feynman. Richard
The
P. Feynman,
physicist also, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's another physicist, but he's a little more contemporary. He's no longer living, unfortunately, but he is the epitome of learn and be curious. And he wrote some very interesting books, easy to read books. He's written some great lectures. He was an MIT lecturer. And importantly, one of the last things he did in his professional career was he led the investigation into the Space Shuttle Challenger
I'll talk to the
construction.
person outside. We'll say if he can extend for 5
Okay,
minutes.
cool.
I don't know that he's standing out there now, but check.
Very Amazonian. These aspects we deal with.
Nobody knows.
Okay, cool. So we got Albert Einstein. We got Richard Feynman.
Yep.
This is interesting.
Third one?
Yeah, third one.
Andrew, why physicist? You're a political science guy, like. Come on.
I had 2 years of engineering.
I feel like that was your gateway drug to physics. The engineering.
Well,
stuff.
I'll tell you what political science did, which I didn't have any appreciation for when I was in high school and doing all that math and sciences, was it taught me how to write, and it taught me how to make a logical argument on paper, which is not a skill I had going into college. So I appreciate that, and it's valued here.
Yeah.
Not that I've had a lot of opportunity to do a lot of writing here. In finance here, we tend to do more like marking up other people's work, but still. Third one. I don't know. I would go. I don't know.
we could come back to it too.
You know what? I'm on this finance bend, or sorry, this physics bend. So the only people are popping in my head are people like Copernicus and things like that. But I don't think he would be on my list.
Let's table it, and if
That's
something,
a nerdy answer.
yeah, if
Da
something,
Vinci maybe,
Da Vinci would be good.
because he's got a lot of things you can touch and feel.
Yeah, yeah, the Renaissance man.
All those models.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you like to consume new content? I didn't know you like podcasts. Is it books, documentaries? What's your your go-to?
I spend most of my free time with some kind of audio thing going through my head, and it's not music. So I do listen to a lot of podcasts, which is just a great vehicle because you get to time shift that content, and you're not beholden to what the broadcast hour is. So I probably prefer podcasts as a medium. I do like to read. Nice thing about podcasts is they can often go very deep into a topic rather than if you're watching a news show or something in these 30-minute chunks that you get 5 topics and nothing's deep. It's just all surface. An occasional article as well. In terms of newsprint, I will read some books. I also like science fiction, so I'll read that, but that's not really learning, that's just having fun. I haven't yet found a path to really enjoying kind of like histories,
Have you heard of, I think it's George Carlin? He has the Hardcore History podcast. If that would be something I bet would be up your alley. I'll share it with you. But he does 3-hour shows on the nuances of being in the trenches of World War I, stuff like that.
I think I do know what you're talking about, and I have had conversations. I had listened to those. That one feels almost too long, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to dedicate that much of my time. I like being able to consume the thing in an hour time block, rather than having to set it aside and come back and remember where I was.
Right on.
But I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. What?
Some very interesting histories on the Shogun and things like that I've listened to on that, but they were long. Good for super long drives.
What do you do for fun outside of work? I know you probably just being curious outside of work is something you do, but what's
Where do I spend my leisure time?
Sure.
I spend a lot of time on bicycling, mountain biking, road biking, repairing my bicycles. Or exploring. I've spent a lot of time the last year and a half just sort of driving around the Olympic Peninsula and exploring that. It's so beautiful here,
And Andrew has lost a lot of weight, He's the keto guy in AWS Infra.
Yeah, I lost about 30 pounds over the last year and a half.
And you bike rain or shine too.
I bike every day. It's raining now. It wasn't raining this morning, but yeah, every day I bike. If there's snow on the ground, I bike carefully.
I love it.
Yeah.
And is there anything? Well, I was going to say, is there anything strange that you like to do that other people might describe as weird?
Well, if you ask my daughter, everything I do is weird. But one thing I do like to do, and I've kind of taken to this probably since I moved here 3 years ago, was I enjoy making like fermented hot sauce. So I'll go off and get some habanero peppers and a whole bunch of other stuff and let that ferment for a while and turn it into a hot sauce. That's a little weird, but
that's
it's
definitely
fun.
Weird. That's good.
Unicycle's a little weird too. Some people would say so.
And one of the things we like, the topics we like to end on is, well, is there anything that we didn't cover? That's kind of what we want to throw out there, but also like what guidance would you have for people, just like a general life philosophy? What's something that, I don't know, your rules to life that you might want to, you might be able to impart?
It's funny. We live in a world of competing interests and competing priorities, and no matter what's going on in the outside world, once you start bringing children into the world, I think you have an obligation to make sure that the children have the life that you want them to live. And so for me, an operating philosophy of life is no matter what I'm doing, I've got to figure out a way to make time for my children and make sure that my income is sufficient to support let's call it the quality of life that I would want for my kids. That does mean you have to make some career trade-off potentially. And yeah, there was, being an independent consultant makes things a lot harder. Having full employment in a company like this one is important. So it is a factor for me personally. So that's one. There was something else that popped into my head. Balanced against what I just said there around making sure that you have you've set yourself up basically for success in life that you want. Set yourself up for a life that can enable the success that you want for your children. Probably the best way to put that is lifelong learning is important. And if you are finding yourself in a role that you aren't learning or finding enjoyable, see what you can do about finding a path out of that meets that other obligation. I caution people from jumping because based on passion. I am so unhappy, I'm going to quit. And then you walk away and you're like, now what do I do? Right? You do not want to find yourself in that position. It's great if you can find, if you're in that position and unemployment is sitting around 2%, that's a very different situation than if the bottom has fallen out of the economy and you decide to just jump ship and go. Go find something, but find something with a plan. But I encourage people to go follow your passions. The most fun I've ever had at work right now is one of the most fun things I've done in a sort of a work environment. There's some frustrations to it, for sure. The only other thing that came this close was working on the solar business, where I just couldn't wait to get up in the morning and go do something. Having that, the overlay there for me was, hey, I'm contributing to leaving the planet better for my children than my parents left it for me.
Yeah. And maybe I just want to ask, what advice are you giving your kids now? They're starting college, and what do you tell them? What do you kind of hope they follow as they're going through this?
Yeah, my kids, children in general, don't like to follow advice, especially from their parents so much.
Yeah.
What I've tried to impart on my children is what you're studying. Don't listen to people who say it doesn't matter what you study in college. What you study in college is directly relevant to what your first job or two are going to be. And if what you're studying is not something you want to get a job in, or it doesn't really have a path to, let's call it rational income, livable income, think about modifying what you're studying so that the degree is more relevant to life in the United States. that's the advice I've tried to impart, and I think they're following it. You know, I'm not disparaging anybody's major. If you study French as an undergrad, what are your career paths with French? I guess you could go be an interpreter. You might go be a teacher.
Or you could do coding, you know.
Or you could do coding in French.
No, like a coder could be. You don't need to. You know now the world has changed. You know, you could go to YouTube, learn Python, learn different languages.
You could, but that's a different learning path, right? So I would graduate with a French degree, and then I'd have to go learn a whole bunch of new stuff in order to be a coder, which is fine.
Yeah.
Which is fine, but do I need to spend $100,000 for an undergraduate experience so that I could then leave that experience and go learn what I'm going to do for the rest of my life? Maybe that's a value, but the question was, what advice would I give to my children? That was it.
Yeah.
You know,
I was actually trying to imply the same advice to me, because I am a biochemical engineer, and then I became a software engineer. You know, and I had never used biochemical engineering in my entire life.
Well, I think that the point.
But I think I was just trying to.
I was a poli-sci major.
Yeah.
You know, there are some transferable skills.
Yeah.
Transferable skills are important, and you know, one of the things you get out of college is just learning how to learn and adapt. But that's a life skill.
Yeah.
I would love people to have both a life skill and a professional skill.
Yeah, I mean, the point that I take from it is that like if you're going to go become a coder, you would go on YouTube and you learn how to code to get a job in coding. And a lot of times, like, people might look at college and they might not, like, believe it or not, make that connection of like, what am I studying to what I want to do the next year.
Yeah.
And I think just kind of making that connection, like, it's pretty logical, you know. The world is changing too, you know. So people kind of go into college thinking, I just need to get a degree, and then you could probably leverage it a little better or maybe just skip college, right, and just go study coding.
Why not? There's plenty of programs that teach that. You go do it online, as you say, or you could go to some community college, or you can get into some incubator space that teaches coding. And I have a nephew that's done that. He's now very successful. He's the CTO of a startup company. He took his degree that he got at the University of Richmond. I don't even know what the degree was. Might have been economics. But after that he went to San Francisco and learned how to code, and now he's living in Colorado, you know, in Boulder, and is the CTO of a software startup.
Yeah, if I'm seeing a theme coming out of this show, it's sort of that lifelong learn and be curious. Yeah, I think that's a takeaway.
Learn and be curious.
And on that note, why don't we maybe pencil this? We'll probably do a round 2 at some point. Okay. We have these conversations all day, every day, and
happy to chat.
Thanks a lot for coming.
I love talking.
Yeah, we appreciate
talking is not a problem for
Perfect guest. All right, adios. Yo, what up, everybody? Thanks for tuning into the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe. Feel free to leave a rating, a review, what have you. But most of all, go have a fantastical day. Okay, we'll see you soon. Goodbye.